Team Coconut is really trying hard to win over male voters, but I'm not so sure they know how. Kamala and Tim are doing just fine with female voters because apparently the anytime, anywhere, for any reason, on-demand, DoorDash-style abortion agenda is really working for them. But that kind of thing isn't as appealing to men, especially of the manly and God-fearing variety. And shucks, not even that rugged camo hat did the trick. The white dudes for Harris definitely didn't work either. Sorry, Mark Cuban. So on to phase two. Talk about guns and trucks. Yeehaw. Kamala started laying the groundwork for this ploy during the debate by telling us she's a gun owner, and she repeated that same line to Oprah last week and added this just for some extra pizzazz.
I'm a gun owner. Tim Walz is a gun.
I did not know that.
If somebody breaks in my house, they're getting shot.
Yes, I hear that. I hear that.
Probably should not have said that.
But
my staff will deal with that later.
Yeah.
I think my favorite part is when she pretended that line just slipped out and wasn't part of her script. There are a lot of things she shouldn't have said in that town hall. The word salads alone gave us mental food poisoning, but make no mistake, that line about shooting an intruder was 100% planned. Her team thinks making Kamala seem more like a gun-toting badass will help with her man problem. But then there's her running mate, Tim Walz, with this performance. Very demure, very cutesy.
All right, this thing, old school carburetor. You can always tell something about somebody's maintenance when how clean their air filter is. Look, to be able to work on this thing, you got a manual. It shows you exactly what to do to fix things on this. Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have a manual too. It's called Project 2025. You can always tell again somebody, if they keep a clean air filter, they do good maintenance.
From the looks of Timmy's baby soft hands, I'm going to go ahead and guess that's the first and last time his spirit fingers have been under the hood. And just a hint to whoever the wannabe filmmaker on the campaign team is who put that little production together, pulling out a filter and putting it back in doesn't really count as maintenance work, and it sure as hell isn't going to appeal to working class dudes you desperately need to win over. Don't they know that real men are actually into line dancing?
Jump in on the run, buddy. This is bad.
Come on, Will.
Joining me now is the line dancing man himself and host of the Will Cain Show, Will Cain. Okay, Will, I was a little concerned that they weren't going to let you come back to Texas after that, but I'm assuming they did allow you back in the state.
During your clip, all I thought about is what are the standards and practices of the Tomi Lahren is Fearless show? Can I give her the bird for bringing this up? What can I do? What can I say? What I will say is, while I got mocked online, by the way, very difficult. They had sped up the tempo. The pacing was more than our practice during the commercial break, and they made us, Tommy, jump in on the run. I need to go from the top. I can't be jumping in on step 4, 5, 6. But what I find as my salvation in this little conversation and on Saturday morning on Fox and Friends is that, yeah, I'm from Texas. That doesn't mean you can line dance. That usually meant you were going no, over at the side of the bar or during practice if you were in high school. I'm not going out there and line dancing. I can two-step, Tommy. I can do a Western swing, but I have been raised, at least among my friends, I don't know if by my parents, that men don't line dance. So I'll just say this. Congratulations, Hegseth. You are the best line dancer. May you accept your trophy and share it with Tim Walz.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, actually. How well do you think Tim would have done? Because Pete from Minnesota, Tim Walz also in Minnesota. I'm wondering, from the looks of his, rocket kicks when he goes out on stage, I'm assuming that Tim Walz would have done a fantastic job if given that challenge.
Yeah, his jazz fingers and his rocket kicks. I think he's I'm putting my money on Tim Walz is a good line dancer.
Yeah, me as well. Question for you, though, based on that little clip that I showed you before, the clip of you, the more embarrassing clip of the two was actually Tim Walz with him working on the truck and then putting that out. And again, the canned line about, oh, the manual, and J.D. Vance and Donald Trump have a manual too. It's Project 2025, which has been disavowed repeatedly. It's their same old tired line they keep using. But do you think these little videos and their desperate attempts to make them seem like they're, working class dudes, do you think that that's helping the campaign effort to win over male voters?
No, and I'll tell you why. But let me start with something that sounds more personal than it is. When you played that Tim Walz video, and I'd seen it a couple times, so I was just watching it here with you on your show. When you played that video, I was struck by, Tomi, the performance. Like, Tim Walz was actually pretty good. I wondered, as I was watching it, how many cuts did they have to do? Like, how many edits and how many takes? And the way he looked into the camera, and I even thought, what kind of camera is it? Is it a cell phone? And here's why I thought all that, okay? This is the personal part. This job has changed over time, what you and I do. And if I'm being honest about what I'm good at and what I'm not particularly good at, it sounds like I'm complimenting myself because in a job interview, what's your biggest failing? I'm too much of a perfectionist. My failing is that I got into this because I wanted to be real. I really, really like authenticity. And by the way, I said this last time I was with you. It's one of the things I'm learning that I really like about you is that I'm getting to see you authentically. And your opinions are 100% authentic. And they're well-reasoned and well thought out. But this business, what we do, and I'm going to merge this business with politics, has really, Tomi, gravitated to performance. It really has. Because in 30 seconds, how real can you be? And most people's attention span has gravitated to the scroll, the swipe on TikTok or Instagram Reels or maybe even X. And so what can you do in 30 seconds? And what it rewards is performance. And I actually thought, well, that's a pretty good performance by Tim Walz. And I also thought about Kamala in that clip that you played where she's talking about the guns. And the laugh, and I'm going to take this bigger to your bigger question just a second, but the laugh. I think about her laugh a lot because I think it's deeper. Because her laugh is not joyful. It's not authentic. That's not real. It's like a self-defense coping mechanism that fills the blank spaces of awkwardness. And it's almost always in response to something she has said, not you have said or I have said or whoever she's speaking with. And that's not how I laugh. I've never laughed at my own joke like that. And so what I'm getting at is it's performance. Her launch onto the national stage, like in that debate against Mike Pence, was performance. I'm speaking, in the facial expressions. It's so performance-based. And the reason I'm talking about performance isn't to talk about me and media. It's to say everything about Harris Walz is performance. And another way to say it, less kind, would be phony. And so the camo hats and the male projection, it's phony. The joy, it's phony. The policy prescriptions, it's phony. She's not real with what she's saying now in a general election. What's real, the authenticity, is who she was in 2020. And I actually don't know that the performance, to your question now, Tomi, is working. It may or may not, and that remains to be seen. But they're trying to get elected via performance to the presidency.
Yeah, I agree. And, to bring that back to the town hall and the laughing, I think you're 100% right. I brought this up actually when we were on with Hannity at Clay and I were talking about it. Kamala is actually more authentic in 2019, 2020, and then way back in old clips of 2007 and other resurrected, now viral clips, when she's talking about her radical Marxist agenda. She's actually really passionate about it. She speaks much better and much more articulately when she's talking about that than she does when she's trying to remember the lines that her people told her to remember. Now, she and Joe Biden have kind of the same struggle that they're trying to remember a line, but at one point in his life, Joe Biden could have remembered the lines, or he could have given you his policy positions. And then, of course, dementia got the better of him, allegedly. But Kamala, she doesn't know what to do because she doesn't know what happens when she's on the spot, and she doesn't actually know what she believes in. And I think that might be one of the reasons the polls are shifting, but I'm a little weary because I know how great the Democrat voting machine is, so I'm still concerned that it's going to work.
Yeah, I think as of today, there's two things that came out in the news that tie into what we're talking about. One is an older video now of Kamala Harris chanting, what is she saying? Down with deportations, right? It's from 2019, I believe, maybe 2020. And it's like a song, and they're all singing, down with deportations. I don't know, something like that. I'm not sure that's the exact jingle. But she's singing it. And the other is the New York Times Siena poll, which shows Donald Trump has a pretty decent lead, 4 and 5 points in Arizona and Georgia, and then a smaller but still leading in North Carolina. And when you read the article and dig into what it is people say about why she didn't have a big win in the debate, like some of us, I will say myself, thought she might have won that debate. It's because people don't trust her. They don't know and they don't trust that she's being real about who she is, or that she can deliver competently wise on what she's saying she would do as president. And that's showing, maybe that is, Tomi, showing the limitations of her performance.
I want to talk about the rally sizes. This is something that Donald Trump likes to talk about, but I am a little perplexed by something. I know that there's been allegations of Kamala busing people in from maybe more urban areas. Maybe they're getting paid. Who really knows? I wouldn't put anything past them. But what do you make of some of these crowd sizes that she is able to amass in places like Georgia? I mean, I didn't think anybody liked Kamala. I think maybe when she first became the candidate, people were excited just because it wasn't Joe Biden anymore. But she's still bringing in a good amount of people. What do you make of that? And do you think that it's anything to be worried about?
Well, I don't know that it's manufactured, and I'll be honest, like I'm not totally, I'm not read in. I don't know all the details, whether or not, I don't know the turnout, and I don't know how many people might have been bussed. But I do know this. To your point, it's different than what was turning out to show up for Joe Biden. Now, okay, it's different. Does that mean the Democratic machine is more rallied around ensuring a good-looking turnout for her than it was Joe Biden? I don't know. Or does it mean, and this could be the answer, a more enthused base is there for Kamala Harris than for Joe Biden? And I do think that's probably true. I think many on the left, here's a story for you. You know, I lived in New York for like 15 years, and so I have a lot of friends that live in New York City, and trust me, when you live in New York City, you have friends across the aisle. One of my friends was telling me he was out on Long Island on the beaches, and he saw all the people out there wearing hats that say, and I haven't seen this hat. I don't know if you've seen this in Nashville. I certainly haven't seen it in Dallas. Comma, L.A., like the comma in grammar, L.A.
Oh,
Kamala.
gotcha.
And so the point is, there is an element of the left that is enthused, that may show up to a rally for Kamala Harris. And I'm still perplexed by the existence of the swing voter, the undecided. I don't really know who that is. And those are people, I know people who are for Kamala Harris. I don't know many that are undecided, but they exist, I guess. But my suspicion is this election is more about motivating the enthused on both sides to turn out for you. Joe Biden couldn't. Maybe it can happen with Kamala Harris.
Well, there's some other things that I think are going to be on ballots across the country that might have a little bit of pull, and I'm nervous about it. Republicans have lost every major election where abortion has been an issue since the Roe v. Wade overturned the Dobbs decision. And I'm worried that there are some other initiatives in other states that might also get Democrats or more liberal left-leaning people to turn out. And one of those, I'm not necessarily worried about Florida, but I'm curious your take on it. Donald Trump has actually come out in support of legalizing marijuana in Florida, if done the right way, of course, he says. But I'm curious to know your thoughts on some of these ballot initiatives, especially as it pertains to legalizing weed. I think that's going to get more Democrats out than Republicans.
Yeah, I didn't know that Donald Trump had said that about Florida looking to go recreational marijuana. I think as a voting issue, you're probably right. That could bring out some people that might not otherwise vote, and that's probably good for Kamala Harris. So my thoughts on this are less on the front of political analysis and more on political philosophy. You know, there was a time when I would have described myself as a libertarian, Tomi, where I would have said, you know, if you're not hurting someone else, then you should be free. I have gravitated with life, and I would like to think some wisdom, but I remain humble about that. I'm still willing to evolve more and consider points of view. That society's open embrace of drugs is not going to be a long-term good prospect for America. Now, if you like to smoke marijuana, I don't care. I don't have any judgment, and I certainly don't want you to go to jail. But I do think that when you legalize something, you give it a little bit of a stamp of approval. I'm not saying it should, you know. William F. Buckley once famously said to Jesse Jackson, you know, it's legal to vote for Jesse Jackson, but that doesn't make it advisable. So just because something is legal doesn't mean it's advisable and that you should do it. But for many in society, it does give a bit of a stamp of approval. And I've been to Colorado, I've been into Mexico, and it's moving this way in Oklahoma. I don't think that societal stamp of approval is good for society. Now, I don't think marijuana is the worst thing in the world. I also don't think it's the best thing in the world. I think like everything else, it's got its pros and its cons. I think that those that support it try to pretend like it's totally harmless. I don't think that's true. I also don't think it's heroin. But I think that sometimes, I know this sounds odd, but like sometimes it's okay for something to be illegal and for society to not take it all that seriously. Meaning it's illegal, but we're not throwing the book at everybody who is breaking that law. And so what we accomplished there is, a little bit like gambling was, sports gambling, before it became legal. I'm worried about that as well. And I'm a big sports fan. I'm worried, like the societal approval, hey, go gamble. I don't know that that has a good long-term effect on young men in this country. Now, does that mean I look back on it and go, we should have cops in every corner and ensure that nobody places a bet with their local bookie? No, I don't think that. Maybe what I'm getting at is sometimes there's a value morally for a society for a black market.
Yeah. What concerns me is just like you see in New York City and Denver, elsewhere around the country that has gone that route of recreational weed. It's that you smell it everywhere. I mean, if someone wants to smoke weed in their own home or whatever, I mean, go for it. Knock yourself out, even quite literally. I don't want to smell it, though, because to me, it's not harmless. And to me, it brings out the bums and it brings out the losers. Now, not everybody that smokes weed is a bum or a loser, but it tends to bring that out onto the streets and they stand there. I mean, you spend so much time in New York City, you know far better than I, that you just can't avoid it and it stinks and it leads to other things. And to me, it also leads to people milling about and loitering and trying to sell you a mixtape or trying to sell you weed or people standing there, just doing nothing all day long. And I think that brings it in. Denver learned that the hard way. They had all those people move to Denver that were essentially useless, laying around on the street corners just wanting to smoke weed, and then they were left with that mess. Obviously, much bigger problems in Denver now with all of their illegals. But that's just my concern. I would hate to see Florida go that direction and just be a cesspool.
It is aesthetically, to your point, it's not good in New York. It's just not a good aesthetic in New York to see. And for that matter, I live too close. And I love you, Oklahoma, but too close to Oklahoma. And to see the green cross everywhere you go, but there's one more element to this, and people lob this against me, and not you, because you like it as well. People lob this against me when I'm into sports, okay? Yeah, and I'm unapologetic. I'm into sports. But there's some very serious issues facing America. And if you're motivated, to your point a minute ago, to go vote because Florida may legalize marijuana, you should step back and go, doesn't that feel a little bit bread and circus? You know what I mean? Like, here, America's declining in so many different ways, and it's got so many different issues that we should be focused on that really dictate our long-term health as a country. To be focused on legalizing marijuana feels like bread and circuses for the masses. And regardless of how you feel about it, even if you're in support of it, it's like, this is what you're offering me, this type of diversion. And I know that people say the same thing about sports. I disagree. But I don't know that this is the most important thing that everyone... I hope it's not what turns you out to vote, because surely it's not the most important thing facing America.
I don't think it is either, but historically people do turn out to vote when weed is on the ballot. That happened in California actually way back when Prop 8, the same-sex marriage, was on the ballot. Weed was also on the ballot, but it actually backfired because the people that went to vote for weed voted against same-sex marriage. Obviously, that was a long time ago before California became the state of gay. Now, I mean, even just being regular old vanilla gay isn't enough in California, but that did sway an election. So I don't know. I think it could make a difference. I think they really would love to have Florida. I think Democrats are eyeing Florida and they would just love to have it. But then they've got Ron DeSantis and the way that he cracks down, especially on illegal immigration. So, maybe they're just playing all their cards in Florida to see if they can turn it purple again. I don't think so, but I just don't want to smell weed. Another thing I don't want to smell is whatever's going on with Diddy. And, they say he's on suicide watch now. He desperately tried to get out of jail. He really doesn't want to be there. We know that. But I'm wondering your take on all of this, because I think there are a lot of people being real quiet about the Diddy situation, because I think he has a lot of tapes with a lot of influential people on those tapes. And I think he could bring down maybe all of Hollywood and entertainment, or at least a good chunk of it.
You know how there are stories that come up in the news, Tommy, and like there's just some stories that don't do it for you? I'm not saying this is that for me. But this is a story that I feel like it would, but I haven't yet taken the bait to go all in on Diddy. Now, here's the hook to your point and what is interesting to me. How similar is it to Epstein, right? That's the entire debate. And is it for the purposes of blackmail, right? Is it for the purposes of controlling people? I don't know. But who was abused? A. Who was doing the abusing? B. And is it all on tape? C. And for what purposes for Diddy? D. Those would be the interesting elements of the story, clearly, at every step of the way. And that C, like who was doing the abusing, that's what you're alluding to there. And what I'd be curious about is, are they in on it? You know what I mean? Or are they, like is suggested and we don't know, well, they're in on it if they're participating, but are they victims themselves then in turn of blackmail when it comes to Diddy? That's certainly the implication when it comes to Epstein. It wasn't just, a child or a pornographic ring or a prostitution ring. It was a prostitution ring designed to be an extortion mechanism against high-profile people in the United States. And my suspicion is, let's just hope he doesn't kill himself, right? He's on suicide watch. No one will believe it. So if this happens, this is all the more so going to be Epstein.
Yeah. I just think it's so disingenuous for me to constantly get the lectures from the Hollywood individuals about how much they care about people and they're such humanitarians and philanthropists and Donald Trump is so mean and Republicans are so mean and open your doors and open the borders. And then these same people might have been, at the very least, complicit in watching other people get used and abused and used and abused. That to me is what bothers me the most, because if he's having these giant parties, these freak-offs, well-known thing, there are people that were around that saw these things. You don't just hide 1,000 bottles of lube and nobody knew anything crazy was going on, right? I just feel like all of this stinks here, and I think there are some people in some really high places that should be very, very nervous about how this shakes out.
Was that Johnson & Johnson? Like, who produced the baby oil? We got another big order from Diddy. Really? 1,000 bottles. Ship them. By the way, to your point, it's the same story as that politician in New York who was one of the big guys to close down New York businesses, close down everything, and it turns out he was having sex parties. It's Gavin Newsom going to dinner at the French Laundry. We don't need your hypocritical ass moralizing to us about the right way to behave.
Yeah, I think it's just going to be interesting to watch how this shakes out. I think this has been a long time in the making, and I don't think that any of these charges would have been brought if they didn't have cold, hard evidence, and I think they've got a lot of it, and I think they've got a lot of footage. So we'll wait and see. We still don't really know everything about the Epstein case, so maybe we'll never know. I do want to ask you about something that I think is really very important, and probably should have brought this up earlier, but the spending bill, obviously the boring politics stuff, but I think it matters. This spending bill, it seemed like Speaker Johnson was going to be real tough and say, hey, listen, we're not passing a spending bill unless we have the SAVE Act tied to it, which obviously makes sure we don't have illegals voting in federal elections, non-citizens. Democrats obviously wouldn't get on board with that, but now it seems like Johnson is backing off of that, and they're just going to continue to fund the government. And his reasoning for it is this close to an election, it'd be bad for Donald Trump if they shut the government down. But for me, it's like, at what point are Republicans going to start having a backbone? And if we're not willing to stand up for elections, I mean, I don't know how far you can push us, but it seems like pretty far.
Well, at what point? Not this point is the answer. I'll tell you, I've had a lot of conversations recently. There were some people, like I'm talking about citizens, very concerned about this, supporters of Donald Trump. If the government shuts down 2 weeks before an election, 3 weeks before an election, it would have been horrific electorally for Donald Trump. That's what they were all concerned about. Not for the impact necessarily of a government shutdown, but because of what that would have meant for the election. Now, as far as the SAFE Act, to your point, it just wasn't the power. I don't think it's that Johnson doesn't want it, and I think Republicans are working in a lot of places. Like Texas just cleaned up their voter rolls. Of course, Republicans control Texas. So in places where Republicans control it, there's a big effort to clean up the voter rolls and ensure that someone who shouldn't be voting, dead or illegal, isn't voting. I actually don't question Mike Johnson on whether or not he would want to support the SAFE Act. I think it's a matter of, is it possible? And the bottom line is, what is it, like a two vote majority in the House? Is that what we're? I don't know where we are. It's minuscule in the House. And if you want all of these things that we want, we're going to have bigger majorities. Otherwise, the Democrats right there, and they control the Senate, are going to get their way on a lot of issues. That's true. And you're not going to control the Senate, and you're not going to control the presidency if you go about shutting down the government 2 weeks before an election. I hear you, and I'm someone who's said the same things many times. Like, you got to fight to get what you believe in. But I don't think 3 weeks before an election is a very wise time to throw down the gauntlet on this or nothing.
I just don't know at what point we're going to stand up for the integrity of our elections. And I think it's kind of a scenario of a chicken and the egg. It's like, oh, yeah, we want to win an election. Well, if you're not willing to safeguard elections, how are you sure that you're going to win the election? And if we lose this election and Democrats are in power, we know what they're going to do in terms of non-citizen voting because they're already actively working on that. So I'm concerned, like, if we elect these people to go and represent us, and you think the bare minimum they could do is pass something that says, hey, you have to prove your citizenship to vote in federal elections. And the only opposition Democrats are able to voice is, well, that's already illegal. Well, so is crossing the flipping border, but 10 million plus did it. I just don't know at what point Republicans are willing to draw a line in the sand and actually stick to it, because it seems like every time, whether it's the Ukraine funding or whether it's the Inflation Reduction Act, I mean, at every turn, Democrats pretty much get everything that they want. And then we sit back and go like, shucks, we tried, but just couldn't do it this time. I mean, I just don't know why even vote for Republicans if they're not going to do anything.
Well, on the Ukraine thing, you've got an ideological divide within the Republican Party. That's the truth. You've got some that are pro and some that are anti funding the war in Ukraine. When it comes to the Inflation Reduction Act, I don't know. I can't remember why certain Republicans would have voted for the Inflation Reduction Act. But when it comes to the SAFE Act, my suspicion is, Tommy, and I could be wrong, you don't have that divide among Republicans. But the problem is, can you actually get it passed? Because you have opposition when it comes to the Democrats. In order to overcome that opposition, you have to win. You have to win. You have to win the Senate. You have to win the presidency. Otherwise, we just can't. I hear you on all that stuff. I'll tell you all. By the way, one more note on this. It's always going to be an away game. Like, even if Republicans own everything, the House, the Senate, and the presidency, it's always an away game because the government goes in one direction, growth. It never cuts back. And to your point of when do we ever get Republicans that can do that, who want to do that, is a legitimate question. Who will ever cut back? I forgot my point where I was going with on the... I don't think there's an ideological divide on the SAFE Act. I really don't. I think most Republicans would want to pursue that if they had the power. We can't become a small minority, small vocal intransigent minority who is really good at spinning off podcasts. We can't do that. Like, you got to win. You got to win in order to execute your vision. And then to your point, hope that you're electing people that share your vision. Just because they have an R beside their name isn't evidence that they share your vision.
This to me is just such a basic thing, and it just takes me back to when Donald Trump won in 2016, and in 2017 we had majorities and we could have done something about the border then, and Republicans didn't have the backbone to do it then, and so we just kicked the can down the road. Then you get a Joe Biden elected, 10 million come in, and now we're back to the same situation where it's like, boy, Republicans going to make sure the illegals aren't voting because now we're in a real pickle, and Republicans go, well, we just can't do it this time, but like keep electing us and we're finally going to do something about it. I only see Donald Trump as having an appetite to actually want to enforce the border. He's the only one that ever put anything on the line to secure that border, to get funding for the wall. And it just seems like every other elected Republican, at least in Congress, not the governors, but in Congress, they don't have the backbone to stand up to this issue. And we will never win again if illegals are voting. We just won't. So I'm just wondering what point.
Tommy, what do you make of, I'm sure you saw at least clips from Donald Trump's interview with Cheryl Atkinson, who's former CBS News. She's a great investigative reporter. She, for example, asked him, will you run in 2028? Great question, by the way. And you got an interesting answer from him, which was no. If I lose, I won't run in 2028. Of course, he'd be 82 at that point. But she also asked him about deportations. And she said, will you deport? Because she said, and she's right, one bad image, of a mom being put on a bus with kids or whatever, and it's going to be outrage. And he said, you're absolutely right. And it almost seemed like he backed off the idea of mass deportations. He said, well, we're going to get rid of the criminals. What do you make of Donald Trump saying that when in the past he's talked about big deportation?
I understand why he would say it politically. I understand because people get really in their feels when they watch people who should have never been in our country be removed from the country that they came into. I guess fires me up so much, Will, because when people just clutch their pearls about mass deportation, but y'all didn't have a problem when these people were lining up at the border with mothers and children coming into our country and taking advantage of our country. Like that didn't bother you when they waltzed in, but then taking those same people and saying, no, you're going to have to come in the right way. You can't come in at all. Then all of a sudden, like we cry and it's like, oh, that's so hard. Well, this should have never been a thing. And so unfortunately, we have to correct a wrong. And if we're not willing to do it, then I guess we just live with the consequences of having 10, 15 million people in this country sucking off the government, taking jobs, and being in communities like Springfield, Ohio, and overtaking the communities. I mean, it's never going to look good, but at what point do we actually put Americans first in this country? And I think that goes to my overall sentiment on this and why this makes me so angry. It just doesn't seem like Republicans have the will to put Americans first, although they campaign on that very thing.
What I'm curious about, to your point, is Republicans is kind of a broad statement, right? What about Donald Trump? So what he has to say now, but what will he do if he is president? I'm curious. I don't know now. I don't know. Like, will he deport the tens of millions of illegal immigrants who are already in this country? I don't know the answer to that question.
I think it's going to be an uphill battle. I think he's going to get challenged over and over and over again. If we start with the criminals and work our way back, I just don't think it's an unreasonable thing to ask that if you came into this country legally, that I think you give people 90 days to self-deport and you tell them, hey, listen, 90 days, we will get you whatever you need to get back to your country of origin, and then you can start the process of coming legally. But if you don't self-deport within 90 days, you will be deported and you will not be allowed to apply for legal entry in the future. And I think that that's very fair, and I think it gives people the autonomy to make that decision for themselves. But I just don't understand why it's just constantly on the backs of the American people to take care of the rest of the world, and then we continually vote for this to put ourselves last.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I agree philosophically. I agree ideologically. And I think for people like you and me and someone who's a sitting member of Congress, what you have to reconcile is what is my ideal vision of America that conforms to my ideology and my philosophy, and what can I get done strategically and with the will of the American people. And I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I just think that when it comes to, for example, and I'm applying this now to the SAFE Act and the government shutdown, and I'm applying this to Donald Trump and his words on deportation. Politics, people like to say it's about compromise. Politics is about accomplishing your ideal, philosophical or ideological vision of America with reality. That's the art, right? That's what it is. Otherwise, you get to do what I do and constantly say what's ideal without actually having to do it, So I just understand, and I'm not forgiving all of these politicians because you have to put them to the test on what they truly believe and their will to comport what they believe to reality. But I do know that's what is politics. What can I get accomplished in reality?
Yeah. I guess final point I'd make on that is that there are several Republicans who are willing to lose elections for extreme abortion bans, but they're not willing to lose elections over simply making sure that non-citizens aren't voting in elections. I mean, that's like, oh, we couldn't quite get that one done, but like we are willing to lose in every ballot measure on abortion. That's the one, but everything else though, just like the bare minimum little thing that most Americans actually support, we just can't quite get that one done for you. It frustrates me. But, Will, I've taken so much of your time today. Thank you as always, for being on with me.
It's a fun conversation.
And thank you for blessing us with your line dancing. Dancing with the Stars might be in your future.
I'll just have to scour the tapes to find what I'll play the next time you're on the Will Cain Show, Tomi.
Oh, well, boy, that sounds like a threat. But also, like I just said, Will, you could be on Dancing with the Stars. And maybe we just propelled that to being in the cards for you if ABC would ever let.
Tomi, have you been invited?
No.
Have you been invited to do Dancing with the Stars? No? I wouldn't have been surprised if you said yes.
I would
Would you
say
do
yes.
it if invited?
I would if invited, but that's probably never going to happen. You probably have a higher likelihood of being on Dancing with the Stars than I do.
My answer in the past has always been I wouldn't do it because I'm just not a dancer and it would embarrass me.
Well, that's the point. You learn how to dance well. That's the point. You're not supposed to go in knowing how to dance.
Tucker did it, right? And did he only last like a round? I think Tucker was on Dancing with the Stars.
Wow.
Fact check me right now. You've got a producer there somewhere. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to say it was like in 2014, maybe?
Okay.
13, 14, 15. I think Tucker was on Dancing with the Stars.
Wow. Well, I think Geraldo was on Dancing with the Stars, and Sean Spicer was on Dancing with the Stars. So you never know. Maybe one of us one day will get the call, and I guess we will cross that bridge when we come to it.
All right. I look forward to that.
All right.
Bridge.
Thanks, Will. I'll
Thanks,
talk to you soon. All right, folks, a city in Maryland just approved a measure allowing non-citizens to vote. And my friends, this is just the beginning. It's time for final thoughts. So the city of Frederick in Maryland just became the largest municipality in Maryland to allow non-citizens to vote in local elections. The Board of Aldermen approved it on a 4-1 decision with only one dissenting vote. Advocates say it's only fair that all of the people living in Frederick get a say. Pay close attention to that line because you're going to hear it a lot over the next couple of years. As of now, D.C., as well as a handful of municipalities in California, Maryland, and Vermont allow illegals to vote in local elections, though they swear they aren't voting in federal elections because that would be against the law, kind of like coming across the border illegally. But in case you haven't caught on to this by now, the Democratic Party is excellent at making the rules, breaking the rules, and then changing the rules to whatever fits their quest for power best. And this business of non-citizens being allowed to vote in local elections is just another rung on the ladder. It's not at all dissimilar to what they did with the help of the COVID pandemic. California got ahead of the game with its mail-in balloting years in advance, and then lo and behold, COVID happened and mass mail-in ballots, along with extended early voting and even ballot harvesting in some places, made its way around the country, and now it's normal. The same thing is going to happen with this non-citizens voting in local election business. That'll spread, and pretty soon it'll go national and federal, and it'll just be the normal thing to do. And shucks, just like magic, the Democrats will have legions of illegals packed into every state, especially the swing states, primed and ready for that day to come. It's really not hard to connect the dots here, especially when you have Democrats in the House unwilling to pass a spending bill if it contains provisions to explicitly prevent illegals from voting. Democrats do not care if these people commit crimes. They do not care if they take your jobs. They don't care if they bring in deadly drugs or traffic children. They do not care what the impact is to your community or to mine. They only care about winning elections, but not just winning them without having to work for your vote. Democrats are building a firewall, and they're building it brick by brick, town by town, flight by flight, and election law after election law. And they're doing it right in front of our faces. The snowball is snowballing, and I fear even a Trump re-election won't be able to stop it, although he could stop the bleeding. And at this point, a tourniquet is better than nothing. Those are my final thoughts. Please be sure to tune in tomorrow live at 1 p.m. Eastern. Catch full episodes of this show on Fox Nation whenever you want. Also, please support the YouTube channel at Tomi Lahren is Fearless. From Nashville, God bless and take care. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want more of my hottest takes, must-see conversations, and of course, my final thoughts, click here and make sure you subscribe here so you never miss a beat. I'll be here every weekday, and I hope you'll join me.